Thanks for joining today. We're going to talk about cybersecurity within nonprofits. Um, and I usually pause on this slide and always talk about just the imagery that we're using here. When we talk about cybersecurity, we don't talk about cybersecurity as an end state where you're going to be fully secured. It's an ever-changing landscape. It's what we like to say a journey and not a destination. And so it's very fitting that we put this image up here of somebody I guess, journeying or trekking through the wilderness and the landscape as we talk about cybersecurity. And so we'll go on from there. I am Michael Nugier. I am the Director of Cybersecurity Services here at Eide Bailly. My contact information is below. A little bit about me. I am in Denver, Colorado. Have been here for about 20 to 25 years or so now. And I have about the same amount of experience, 20 years of experience in IT and cybersecurity in general. Delivering cybersecurity, doing penetration testing, hacking, if you will, strategizing and building secure solutions for governments, nonprofits, and just about every industry vertical in between there over the last 20 or so years. And so really looking forward to talking to you today. I'm going to stop sharing my camera during the rest of this presentation just to avoid confusion so we can focus on the slide deck here. As we move forward, what we're going to talk about today, here's our agenda, just 3 key items. What the cybersecurity landscape is looking like, the threats and the risks that are out there, what we're seeing in the news. Some pretty big deals, big attacks have happened as of late. And so we want to touch on those and what that looks like and how that impacts all of us, because those aren't the only cyber attacks that are happening. Those are just the big ones that are making the news. We want to talk about what the effect a cyber attack has on organizations, nonprofits, and organizations alike. And what that looks like from every aspect, not just, right, we got ransomware and we had to pay a fine, but the lasting effects of that, the PR that can happen from that. And so we'll touch on that from a cyber attack perspective and those impacts. And then we'll talk about some just general best practices and try and cater those to the nonprofit industry, but they really can expand across just the entire every industry within the cybersecurity landscape. And so we'll touch on those. So while we get started here, let's just define what we're talking about. What is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is the protection of your IT systems, networks, data from any malicious actor. A lot of definitions can get really granular with how they're defining that, right? Protection against ransomware and insider threats and things that really, I just wanted to boil this down to its most basic concept and just protecting your IT. What is a cyber attack? And that's a malicious attempt to gain unauthorized access to information systems to corrupt the data or steal the data, typically for financial gain, but there are a lot of other reasons to do this: extortion, stealing the data to use, right? A lot of intellectual property theft is amongst cyber attacks. The most common forms that we see again are ransomware. Phishing is very common nowadays because of its ease of implementation for somebody to do, and just the high effective rate of it. It's very easy to be tricky with those, and people can fall for those very quickly. Another couple types would be denial of service, right? Taking something down from being posted, like a website or a web service, often with logins like Netflix. If we were to take down their login page and people couldn't access that service, that would be considered a denial of service. And then man-in-the-middle attacks are also very common, and that's a very technical term for somebody that's just monitoring data moving back and forth on the internet. We'll move on from here just to look at this is took me about 5 minutes to copy and paste these in here, and the majority of the time was really just learning how to copy and paste images. These are recent news articles from the last couple of weeks of what we've seen happening, right? We obviously have watched the news. We've seen the Colonial Pipeline. If any of you were on the East Coast during that, it was very difficult to get any gasoline for your car. And that was a ransomware attack. It was somewhere around $5 million. There was the Kaseya hack, which happened even more recently over the 4th of July weekend, where 1,500 plus businesses were compromised because of a vulnerability found in a common software that managed IT systems use. And then there was, right, SolarWinds was another big one that happened in November. The JBS meatpacking was $11 million ransomware. Like, I could go on and on and on. These are the ones that make the news because they're so prominent. 5 million, 70 million, 11 million. These are large numbers meant to scare. And as we see these, right, that's kind of the idea of these articles, right, to light a fire amongst people to really understand the prominence of cyber attacks and the depth that they can impact others. And so there's a lot of fear around these news articles. And so what we want to do is like my mission in life is to provide hope around these. But basically what we're seeing here is cyber attacks are more and more present. And as I said, these are just the popular ones. Realistically speaking, 54% of organizations have experienced a cyber attack in the last 12 months, at least one cyber attack. And in reality, there's no difference between a public organization or a private organization and a nonprofit when we're talking these 54% of companies. This is just any type of organization, whether it's an NGO or a for-profit organization. And so as we dive even deeper into that, the Institute of Critical Infrastructure and Technology states that 50% of NGOs or nonprofits have experienced a ransomware attack in the last 12 months. And so that's very telling as to where the industry is headed and what our big trends are as we start looking at what the actual landscape is for cybersecurity. And so here are the top 5 trends from my perspective, right? Ransomware obviously has to be at the top because that's what we're hearing about. It's highly effective in gaining financial, getting the financial payouts that our attackers are looking for. And so ransomware is highly effective, highly high payouts recently. I can tell a story. The first time I was ever involved in a ransomware incident, the payout was $500. And so, it didn't take a lot of time to process whether or not we should pay for it or if we should just spend the time pulling backups. And, there was actually a recent article that came out about how firms and companies and organizations worldwide are opting to pay the ransom because when they actually do try and pull from backups, it is taking upwards of 2 to 3 months. One organization stated that if they wanted to recover their full backups, it would take 69 years, according to the infrastructure that they had and the timing that it was giving them. And so opting to pay ransomware at $500 is not a total loss for organizations, but as we're seeing ransomware transition in popularity, we're starting to see these larger payouts that are making it more and more difficult to pay, as an organization doesn't always have, say, $11 million or $150,000 to recover their data. Ransomware is not just an ethereal thing. It doesn't just happen in your organization. It usually comes through what we call attack sophistication, right? Somebody has to enter that environment somehow, whether it's a phishing attack or credentials get pulled from a phishing attack, or somebody downloads a package from a phish that gives somebody access to your systems. And so attack sophistication is really what we're seeing from a transition perspective. Years ago, ransomware used to be just, we visited a malicious website and accidentally downloaded something, or I was shopping online at work and went to this website for a discounted product and downloaded something and it loaded ransomware on my computer. Now we're starting to see hackers that are using a common methodology for penetration testing, which is scanning the network for vulnerabilities and finding a way in. And then once they've gained a foothold inside of an organization, they can deploy the ransomware strategically and surgically in order to attack the most prominent systems inside of your organization. So we're seeing a lot of sophistication happening from a lot of the attacks that are occurring, especially considering the first attack that I ever talk about from a historical perspective is the Captain Crunch whistle attack, where somebody found out that if you blew on the whistle that came with your cereal Captain Crunch, it would give you free access to long distance. It made the same tone that the long distance code made to allow you access for long distance. And so that was the first hack, right? Very simple, right? Somebody just figured it out. They sounded the same. They got it right. Now we're seeing hacking groups pop up all over the world, right? You hear a lot about Russia or China and all these different geographic areas where hacking groups like REvil are cropping up and doing these scans of your network and identifying where they can gain a foothold. The next trend we talk about is the growing attack surface. Years ago, when you had your car phone or your big brick phone, right, there was no email associated with that. And so that didn't really lend to the attack surface. The biggest threat there was you calling somebody or somebody calling you and you giving out too much information. Now we can access almost everything on our cell phones. You can connect your thermostat, your stove, your dishwasher, your washing machine to your Wi-Fi, and those are all points of entry into a network. And as we transitioned or transformed, as you'll see is the fourth trend, into this work from home methodology over the last year and a half, out of necessity with COVID, you start to see that this growing attack surface is making a big impact on organizations, right? We're taking our work laptops home, we're accessing critical resources from our home network, and our home network has our thermostat on it, our kids' school computers, our kids' gaming computers, Xboxes, everything along those lines. They all have internet connections. They're all entry points. And so the growing attack surface is something that we have to consider as we're building out our future state and our strategy for securing our organizations, especially since we're considering a more work from home perspective for a lot of our employees. The transformation is also a big concept in trends, as I've already talked about a little bit, but organizations and companies worldwide are moving to this cloud-based methodology so that they don't have to host their own hardware, their own servers, their own websites. It's all managed in this concept of the cloud, right? Where somebody else hosts your information for you, does your backups, builds your websites, right? It's all third party managed. And so we're seeing this and we're so quick to jump to transforming as there's cost savings associated with it, but we have to consider security. We have to bring security into that conversation earlier on as we're transforming to the cloud. And then the last thing that I want to point out as a trend is insider threats. And this has been a large threat vector for organizations and a large risk for organizations for some time, but we've been so focused on keeping the bad guys out that we're not focused on what happens when they can get inside our organization. And so we employ a lot of security at the edge of our organization, or what we call the perimeter, to prevent people from coming in. But what happens if they can get in? Can we monitor and block them from inside? And so the insider threat is a huge up and coming trend, right? How we can protect once somebody is in our organization versus trying to keep them out, because keeping them out is a valiant effort, but we have to plan sufficiently across all aspects of cybersecurity in order to protect ourselves fully. And so those are the 5 trends that I see as we're moving into the future in cybersecurity. And so we'll go from there into what the impacts of a cyber attack have on organizations. Cyber attacks are the fastest growing crime in the United States. They're increasing in cost, sophistication, and impact, right? There are more and more records being stolen every time. It looks like around the average record that is stolen costs an organization about $150 per record, and that's just for personally identifiable information. If we're talking health information, private health information, PHI, or personal health information, right? Those can range anywhere from $100 per record to up to 40,000, depending on what has been released inside of those records. And so it's not just costly from a fine perspective, but also from the attack perspective, right? In recovering from that. Ransomware claims a new victim every 5 seconds, and this is probably increasing or decreasing, right, in the amount of time that it takes a ransomware to claim a new victim. This is an old stat from 2020, and I'm sure once we start gaining the stats from 2021, we're going to start seeing that every couple of seconds or every second, ransomware is claiming a new victim because it is just increasing in popularity. There are ransomware as a services out there that you can go out and buy ransomware and then deploy it against whomever you want. And so we'll start to see that number get even quicker. On average, it's 315 days to detect and contain a malicious breach. The majority of that is how long it takes to just detect it. An average a malicious actor can, on average, a malicious actor will live in an environment for around 250 to 270 days before they're even detected, right? Which is plenty of time to do recon and identify what needs to happen in that organization to cause damage. And then it can, obviously can take 30 to 50 days to recover, and even longer in some cases from malicious breaches. The average cost of a breach in 2020 was $3.86 million worldwide. The US, though, posted its the highest average for any organization based in the United States at 8.64 million was the average breach cost. And that's super telling that, right, we have a ton of regulation in the United States, and so as such, the cost is a lot higher if data and personal information is stolen, and that can range that $8.64 million is spread across legal fees, cost to recover, fines, PR, right down to buying identity theft insurance for the victims that are a part of those breaches. And so the fees aren't hard to see how it can get that high, especially when some breaches can be 2 to 3 million records at any time. And then 83% of data breaches against small businesses are financially motivated, whereas the other 17 can be to put somebody out of business or gain information to financially harm, or not financially harm, but reputationally harm the small business. And then to go one step further, the average cost of a cyber attack on a small business, and so this would be anything like 50, 100 employees or less, is about $380,000. And then the follow-on statistic to that is that organizations that do experience a large cyber attack in the small business realm have a 60% chance of going out of business within 6 months of being victimized. So it's high risk environment for organizations nowadays. And so here are several impacts of a breach or a security incident on a business, right? You can expose confidential or sensitive information. We talked about this. The average cost per data record is around $150 per record. And that can add up when we're talking 2 to 3 million records. In some cases, I've seen organizations that had 200 million records exposed in the past for these large multinational organizations. Second impact can be inaccessible customer or company data, right? This is if it gets encrypted or stolen, and there's some extortion with that and exfiltration. Then we talk about how that data isn't accessible, and that causes brand damage, which is number 3, right? Your business delivery and continuity is impacted. It leads to a potential brand damage and business loss, right? If you host a payment portal for your business and you sell goods and services, and that payment portal doesn't work, but somebody else sells a similar good or product, they will potentially go to that organization to purchase it if your services aren't running at the time. And so business loss there, brand damage. There's a statistic out there around automotive dealerships where 80+% of customers interviewed said they would not visit a a dealership that had been associated with a data breach. And so that is very telling, as 54% of organizations have experienced a breach in the past 12 months, right? And so managing that brand damage that can come from these is very important, as there are lots of choices out there. And even in the nonprofit realm, right? Right, where donors choose to put their money can be based specifically on if there has been a breach to that organization. So we want to make sure that we're managing the brand damage that can happen from these, and lowering the likelihood of an impact or an incident on a nonprofit. Strain on internal resources and management. If a breach is experienced within an organization, it can often or it will impact every employee that is working there. Whether you can get to your resources, you can't make the sales that you need to make, you can't reach out to the donors that you need to reach out to, you've lost access to do what you need to do. It can be harmful to the internal resources, and recovering from that requires a lot of manual labor and work, right? If you can't access the automation that you have inside of your organization, you have to do things on paper, you have to do things on in a more legacy route, if you will, and so that can lead to internal resource strain or unhappiness. And then the last is the unplanned cost due to compromise, right? These are the legal, the regulatory fines, any civil suits and identity protection that are required depending on the type of breach that it is. And so there are 5 common impacts from a security breach. And then this is talking about hope in general. As I said, right, there's a lot of fear, and a lot of the things I said have been mostly based around impact from a cybersecurity breach. But there are things that you can do in the industry that can really help with this. And so organizations that have an incident response plan and a team identified to respond in the event of an incident can realize a savings of about 40% on a data breach. And that means that you will stop the bleeding faster. You will not leak as many data records or personal records, right? You'll be able to respond accordingly and recover from that incident faster, saving 38 to 40% is the average on that. And so that's it's pretty telling. It's a pretty encouraging statement. And so when we ask that last question about, have you tested your IR plan, right? If you have a plan, you are testing it, you have a team identified to respond, right? There is hope and savings in that, that you can recover quickly and not be impacted as severely. We'll move on from there and talk about what we can do to improve cybersecurity. Me being in the cybersecurity industry, offering services for cybersecurity, we like to employ a lot of different solutions and try and cater what is best for organizations. And so we're going to talk about some of those best practices. The first thing I talk about is really building a culture of cybersecurity within your organization. And this is super important because if cybersecurity isn't important, and the security of the organization and the data that lies in there, if it's not important from the top down, then it's not going to be emphasized, and realistically, there's not going to be security thought leadership throughout every aspect of the organization. And that's what we want to talk about when we talk about culture. So the first thing when we talk about building this culture of cybersecurity within your organization is to align the business risk with the cyber risk or the cybersecurity risk and threats that are out there. The business and what the business is doing and how you are doing it, what data you're bringing in, why you're doing what you're doing, your mission and vision, all have to align and integrate security into that. And so that often happens, right? The vision and mission are decided by the leadership of the organization. And so if security is not a part of that mission and vision, it needs to start being a consideration in there so that you can start driving that through the rest of your organization. The second step would be documenting policies, plans, procedures. This is something that can be easily done. There's templates available to do this, to document policies, plans, procedures for different things. What's acceptable for our system use inside of our organization? What's acceptable for your personal use systems? Are you allowed to access resources? and trying to build those acceptable use policies and plans within the organization. A cybersecurity policy that documents what people, processes, technologies you're using inside of your organization to help protect data. And then what we had just talked about, an incident response plan and playbook that states how we're going to respond to an incident, right? Who gets called first, how they get called, what we do in the event of different types of incidents, if you can document and foresee those, right? The big concept now is what do we do in the event of a ransomware infection? And so creating those policies is perfect. And we'll talk about what to do with those policies once they are created. The next is exercising any plans that you have created, right? If you have a business continuity plan, an incident response plan, a disaster recovery plan, all of those go hand in hand in deciding how to maintain during an incident or an emergency, and how to recover from them and respond in the event that it is a cybersecurity incident. We always recommend exercising those plans, spending 4 to 8 hours a couple times a year talking through those plans and going over some scenarios that are common in the industry, right? Like I've worked with some organizations that they would do a quarterly exercise to walk through a common scenario and then to have fun, which I think is very important in building culture in general. They would talk through a zombie apocalypse and exercise their business continuity and disaster recovery plans in the event that there was a zombie apocalypse. Obviously, some people think that that's actually going to happen. Other people don't, but it's fun to walk through, and kind of flex where your plans can be used accordingly. Running these plans helps exercise. The big analogy I use is that you wouldn't sign up for a marathon the day before and just try and run it and win it. It's not gonna bode well if you haven't exercised religiously for that marathon. And the same is true for any of the plans that you have in place. Exercising those, doing tabletop exercises is what we call them in the cybersecurity industry, to test and validate the tools that you have in place and the plans that you have in place, and then engage every aspect that those plans need to call into effect, right? And in an incident response plan, we don't just want to talk about the security team or the IT team. We also want to bring in the key leadership to help corral resources and make the hard decisions. We want to bring in anybody who is in our human resources department to talk about running interference, or whoever handles our public relations, to make sure that we can respond appropriately just in case media finds out about a cyber attack or something around any of these emergencies. And then we also want to know who's calling the trusted partners when and if an emergency happens, who is bringing in our insurance companies, right? Lining up that and assigning roles and divvying out what that would look like, so that when it does happen, we're not running around like chickens with our head cut off. So exercising plans is huge in building this culture, and it also gets a lot of buy-in with anybody that's involved in that. Auditing your current IT infrastructure, and we can call this auditing, we can call this assessing. And so this is just to assess where you currently are, where your weaknesses lie, and what you can do about them. This is often referred to as like a cybersecurity assessment or an IT controls audit, a penetration test. These are all different arenas within the IT industry to assess where you currently are and provide remediation guidance moving forward. A lot of times you can perform your own tests to understand where you're at by running vulnerability scanners and certain other tools. And then oftentimes you can call in a third party to come in and do this and provide you what real world scenarios actually look like when assessing your current IT infrastructure. And then you have to adapt this auditing accordingly, doing like a ransomware assessment or readiness assessment and incident response readiness assessment as well, as a part of this, to understand what's happening inside of your organization, to just get your finger on where you currently are and build out a target state of where you want to be, right? There are risks that are associated with audit, right? You identify those risks, and then you have to identify what you want to do about those risks and making those decisions, whether you want to mitigate or accept the risk or transfer the risk by assigning a third party or cyber insurance or anything along those lines. And so auditing is key as far as building culture. And then the last point, I have educate and train, but really I should add a third bullet point to this and call it marketing, right? If you do all this work to build out cybersecurity culture within your organization, but you're not marketing it internally to your organization, um, then you're missing the most important point. If you're not educating your staff by doing security awareness training at least once or twice per year to bring them up to speed on what some of the best practices are, why you should have a complex password, why why it's important that we're using the text message that's coming after you log in and then you have to enter the 6-digit code. We call that multi-factor authentication, right? Why it's important to utilize those. If you're not training and educating and marketing that, you're not gaining buy-in from the stakeholders that are your employees in your organization, and your customers, if you require those types of things for your customers as well. And so marketing is key to that. Educating on what your current policies are, making sure that as you create policies, people are reading it. As you edit policies, you're communicating that to your stakeholders as well. And getting their buy-in and sign off on those so that they understand it, they've read it. Doing meetings to walk through why it's important as well, as a part of that education and training. And so when we talk about building a cybersecurity culture, these are kind of the 5 aspects. And I made it a circle because I'm a big fan of cyclical processes. I think that, as I stated when we first started, cybersecurity is a journey, it's not a destination. You're not going to be able to just do any of these things once and then move on with your day. It has to be something that's considered in a cyclical manner. So once you're done doing this, you go back and you start wash, rinse, repeat, as we like to say. And that leads perfectly into the next slide that I have here, which is just a high level methodology of what I recommend organizations focus on when it comes to their cybersecurity methodology. All right, you're building this culture. Here's the methodology that you approach it as, this cyclical process. You want to assess your organization. We talked about the auditing, discover, prioritize what's most important, and then build a strategy on that. And then the next step would be to integrate or implement the strategy that you've built from the assess stage. Do the remediation of anything that you've identified as a weakness in your organization. Validate that you have remediated those. Integration is key to strengthening your network and your IT systems. And so I'm a big fan of talking about remediation always, right? It's one of those things that I have been in threat management, offensive security for some time, and a lot of the stories I tell are I can go and I can do a scan of a customer network or client network and identify vulnerabilities year over year over year, and I keep seeing the same vulnerabilities crop up every year. And so those types of things, right? Like knowing is not enough when it comes to cybersecurity, right? We want to make sure that we're implementing or integrating the remediation to the weaknesses that we're seeing. And oftentimes, and we'll talk about this on the next slide, is right, there are things that can be done that are high value, low cost solutions, and getting those quick wins. And then the last, as I said before, wash, rinse, repeat. You want to maintain during this. And so you assess, you integrate, and then you maintain when you're installing cybersecurity software. A lot of the concepts of cybersecurity software are to provide visibility into your network. And so you want to be able to see what's happening in there, be able to respond appropriately, manage what is coming in from an alerting perspective or a threat perspective. And that helps in preventing in the future what is happening inside of your organization. And then doing it all over again, assessing, integrating, and maintaining. We call it the AIM methodology here at Eide Bailly, and this is what we like to employ as a strategy as we go into our clients' environments, is to aim higher so that we can get a better protection and prevention established inside of our clients' organizations. What we can focus on from a nonprofit perspective. Understanding your risks, right? This was the top priority for building the culture of cybersecurity inside of your organization. What are your risks, right? You can go through the who, what, why, where, when of a risk assessment. What are your risks? Who's impacted by these risks? Where do they exist? how can they be mitigated? Why do they exist as well? Asking those questions is really helpful. And then what you want to do about them, right? Sometimes it can be, we want to accept this risk of hosting an older server because the cost to get a new one is there's no cost benefit to upgrading our systems. And so as you get those risks, you don't just want to talk about accepting them, but what compensating controls can go into place as you're determining what your risks are, and identifying where your weaknesses lie within your organization. The next step would be to implement protection, right? We talked about this, right? The first is to assess, risk assessment. The next is to implement or integrate. And so implementing protection, you want to make sure that you're developing a strategy that aligns with the risks that are in your organization. And then build out a roadmap. And I'll jump down to the last bullet point because you don't want to boil the ocean, right? You don't need to boil the ocean when it comes to cybersecurity all the time. You want to build out this roadmap that can determine where we want to be in 5 years from a cybersecurity perspective. We'll focus on the highest value, quickest wins that we can to help protect our organization from the current threats that we're seeing in the industry. But we always want to strive for better. And so we build out a roadmap. We all often talk about 5, 6-year plans to help us achieve what we're looking to achieve and help align financially and from a security perspective where we want to be. Implementing protection also starts with this security first mentality. It's something that I've been saying for the last 20 years as you're going into new ventures within inside of your business, prospecting new clients, prospecting new apps, making sure that security is moved further into the beginning of that process, right? We don't want to I guess the big statement there is, and that we've seen across all industries, is that implementing security after the fact is always a lot higher cost to the organization than talking about it and identifying the risks and talking about what security measures need to go in before moving forward with that. And so it's called the shift left mentality in application security or in general. And so security first mentality. If we want to move forward with this, what are the security impacts that we have to consider as well? Not just the business risks and the financial risks. We also want to understand the security risks. And then we want to align with a strategy as we're implementing protection, right? We don't just want to build a strategy and then start implementing things that somebody else is telling us. We want to make sure that it aligns with where we want to be as a business, where we want to be in the next 5 years. The big thing, and we've talked about how the cost savings that can come from this, is incident response and recovery plans. We need to be able to develop these and test these. The development of them shouldn't take a long time. This is something that again is a cyclical process. It can happen over years as you're working on a roadmap for cybersecurity. But starting off with something and having something in place, and then testing that and identifying where the weaknesses are in your plan, and then doing the lessons learned and making things better. That's a key fundamental to running a business in general, is lessons learned and after action reports, and understanding where did we fail and where can we improve and where did we do well. And those, when we talk about incident response and recovery plans, we want to consider the same thing. We want to make sure that we're coordinating the right resources, and this isn't just internal resources. This is trusted advisors, insurance organizations, law firms, PR. Every aspect of the plan needs to touch every aspect of the business to some extent. It also needs to touch on and document containment and analysis. And so that is, how do we contain incidents, and what are we going to do once they're contained? Building out our recovery and resilience plan. How can we experience an incident and still maintain a level of business? And that's a plan should be able to touch on those as well. And again, as we've already touched on this, you don't have to boil the ocean all at once, right? You can do a lot of things all at once poorly, or you can plan it out and do a lot of things over time and get a better effectiveness out of those. And so we'll touch on some key takeaways. And I'm not not going to read these off, but what I will say is that the cyber threat landscape is incredibly dynamic and changing all the time, and so it's when I say that it is a journey, not a destination. It is imperative that you have a strategy that is fluid enough to adapt with the changing threat landscape out there. The impact of a breach there is always negative, right? And can have just devastating effects on an organization. Implementing a culture of cybersecurity, having a methodology in place to move forward with a cybersecurity strategy is vital when you're talking about growth in general, right? Growth has to consider cybersecurity, and then from a perspective of what can be done first. There are always quick wins, usually low cost quick wins that you can implement inside of your organization. Identifying what those are is key when you're building your strategy and your plans. And again, don't boil the ocean. Don't try and do everything all at once. Right? It's better to do things correctly than to try and spread resources thin to get to certain maturity level as quickly as possible, because it's highly likely that things can be missed in that aspect. And so there were several questions, and you're able to type those in here. I'll answer a couple of these. The first one is, if a company has multi-factor authentication on their VPN, does that protect them from the other connected devices inside of their home? And so a VPN is exactly that. It creates it actually creates what we call a tunnel in the industry to your organization. And so it takes your computer and segments out all the traffic that's happening on it and talks directly to your organization, and it is protected. The multi-factor authentication portion of that is key in keeping others out from logging into that VPN. So a VPN is a great start for protecting your work computer at home. Let's see, where can we find templates and policies? Feel free to reach out. I'll put my contact information up, and we can have this conversation about what templates for policies and plans we have in place, and we can talk about how we can help you out there. I'll put that contact information up next here. Email, phone call, they're all acceptable uses for me. And so there was a question on online donation platforms, and that is absolutely something I can work on. What's best, talking about from a risk perspective. I can reach out outside of this call to touch on what those platforms are and what the development around those should be. We talk about the application security around utilizing things like PayPal. I think the other one is Braintree from a payment acceptance perspective. So I can reach out and discuss that after the call. Were there any other questions? Did anybody want to chat in here? I'm looking at the chat here. All right, so I think that's about it from a questions perspective.
Okay, I don't see any other questions that came in. So I think we're good to go. So hey, everyone gets just a little bit of time back in their day. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Michael, for presenting, and we hope everyone has a great day. See you soon.